the state terrorism in Kashmir, all of this, we often soft pedal it by calling it. It's just like very similar to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. While Palestinians are being shot like pigeons and slaughters and massacres, but it's just a conflict between two peoples. So this is the same thing. That's exactly the same thing that's going on right now in Kashmir. So I think the task, just as a broad point, and we can think about this further for all of you that probably are much more knowledgeable about me, but the emphasis on decolonizing the way that we see these things. And I use that very specifically because while I am also, I also have a law background. I have a JD from the US. But I come from a very strong activist background. And I also know that the law has its limitations, as we have so glaringly, clearly, and tragically seen in so many instances, international conflicts, domestic abuses, all sorts of things. Now, I think it's catch-up time for the Indians with the Israelis in terms of how many international law, legal resolutions and so on that they can violate and get away with it. And that is the other important point, is how the heck do these countries get away with it? Israel, we know, man, the most superpowers supporting it can do whatever it wants. India is a huge market, has been from the 90s and so on, and this annexation takes place. What happens? No consequences, nothing for this. So I just want to say that the legal part, we have to continue it. These judgments from the ICJ, for example, whether it was against the United States in the 1980s, against the Israelis for building the apartheid wall, and whatever we can hope to achieve within Kashmir itself, of course, important. We can rely on that. We can always cite those. But ultimately, we must realize, at least in my view, that the story, the situation of Kashmir is in the realm of the political. And the political, and not to get too philosophical on this, but I start from the famous philosopher Carl Schmitt's position. It's a distinction between friend and enemy. That is the political. The distinction between friend and enemy, so that you can then clearly see what the pathway forward is. There was a mention by General Saab, which is very important in terms of collaborators within your own ranks. And often Western propaganda systems will say in the occupied territories, a group like Hamas or someone else, collaborators, they will, kill or do this and that. And this is must be something unique to Muslims and so on. Well, you just have to remind them that during World War II, in Vichy, France, when the Nazi occupied France, the collaborators with the Nazis, what the French partisans did, not only did they kill the collaborators, they killed their entire families. That was their response to the collaborators at that time. So this type of Western propaganda system that says that these Muslims have something uniquely genetically programmed, that in fact we're not doing enough, as General Saab was saying. But the amendment that I want to make, the friendly amendment, is that the collaborators are not just simply within these Kashmiris themselves. But Nasser mentioned that Canada has just declared Hizbul Mujahideen a terrorist organization. Well, I think Canada beat probably, I think the Saudis were a bit slow this time, but I'm sure that they would have just as well declared Hizbul Mujahideen a terrorist organization, or the Emiratis. The same way they did with the Ikhwan, Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, with Hamas, with whichever organization that they have no use for anymore and which bothers their real mafia don and paymasters in DC and London and so forth. So I think that's a very, coming back to the question of friend and enemy, these collaborators exist far beyond only within Kashmir. And we have to recognize that, and this has become crystal clear. This does not take any, deep investigation or research. This has been so crystal clear in front of us over the past now 1 to 2 years in terms of the positions, in terms of trying to bring this issue into the OIC. I mean, this issue of paramount concern of the Ummah that, supposedly the holiest of countries of our Ummah wants to kind of sideline and not really touch. I mean, it's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace what's going on. So I think that this needs to be called out. And if we don't call that out, we are also being hypocrites. If we just focus on one thing. We know that India is a terrorist state. And we know that it's a terrorist state in Kashmir and elsewhere. And especially now, what's going on in Kashmir. The one thing that I will say in terms of changing the terms of the legal debate, so we go from a situation in which, okay, this is a disputed territory between two countries. Well, India changed that, didn't it? It annexed, Kashmir. Fine. Now let's try some other international law for it. Now let's call it for what it really is. A brutal military occupation of a territory. Of an occupied peoples. Now let's talk about some other things and they're exactly their right to resist for a foreign occupation. Because they have dispensed with any of the previous ways in which you wanted to frame this legally as a disputed territory. So forget about that now. It is an occupied territory. Therefore, whether it's Hizbul Mujahideen or anyone, they have the right to resist under international law, which does not specify, as I said this morning in the protest, it does not say whether peacefully, with armed struggle, whatever. It is fundamentally, and when I say this, when I say the decolonizing part, when you decolonize the way we look at the conflict, then let's call it what it is. It is an anti-colonial conflict. Because I put them at the same level. The problem has been that the awareness of Kashmir has not been as much as of Palestine, of what's been going on in Palestine. But yes, these are the two longest, these are the remnants of the two, of the betrayed kind of decolonization process. So therefore, the anti-colonial struggles in these two places continue against enormous odds. And the problem has been that Palestine has gotten some attention now, although of course we all know the power of the Zionist lobby in preventing any meaningful addressing of the Palestinian question. Edward Said said it best with the Oslo Accords. It was a surrender. That's what it was. And we do not want the Kashmiris to do the same. And the Palestinians have recognized that now, and this is why. So it's not just a surrendering to the Israelis or to the Americans, it's also to the other Arab regimes that have sold them out left, right, and center. And they continue to do so. We do not want to do that as Pakistanis. But the other point I want to emphasize, and I think that this will make us think a little bit more broadly. Yes, we're Pakistanis and we're Kashmiris, but we have to, this will end on because I know we're short on time. You have to take lessons if you really are interested in seeing how this behemoth of this Indian state can be confronted by all means necessary. Whatever militant, non-militant, passive, civil disobedience, and always armed struggle, you name it, whatever. You have to take lessons If we are going to now call this an anti-colonial struggle, then we should study what the anti-colonial struggles taught us. I said this morning, people talk about why Palestine and why Kashmir. We live in a new age now, so it's not the old anti-colonial movements. Okay, well, they were okay, they're fine, we need decolonization, but now we live in the age of the war on terror, and any Muslim resistance is immediately delegitimized and discredited. But of course the Mandelas were great, and they never engaged in any type of violence. Of course, people don't know that Mandela was jailed precisely for founding the armed wing of the ANC. That's why he was jailed. He was not jailed because he was some peace activist no. He was jailed because he founded and got training in Algeria and Libya and so on and so forth. And he could have been freed at least 10 years earlier if he just said, because the apartheid regime was feeling it. The white minority regime in South Africa, they were feeling the pressure. Said, we'll let you go, but just stop the armed struggle. He said, no, I'll stay in jail, but we will not renounce the armed struggle. That's how you dismantle. That was one component of it. But the other component, and we see this clearly happened in South Africa. We have the model where a state was dismantled. An illegitimate state was dismantled, but we see it now in Palestine as well. The Palestinians themselves cannot take on the Israeli state. They can, they're shot like pigeons, they're bombed, massacres, slaughters, all the Gaza routinely, it is about international solidarity. So when we're talking about Pakistanis, they're getting together, yes, the passion is there, but there are so many. Do we think that the Palestinians, the solidarity that's happening with the Palestinians now, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement that's happening right now, is being led just by Palestinians or even other Arabs? No. These are other movements throughout, particularly the Western world, but not only there. When I was in Malaysia, when I was in Turkey, all over, these are other people that are involved that recognize the barbarism that continues, particularly in Palestine, and now they see it in Kashmir. They recognize that, and they're doing something. They're putting pressure on the churches, on this thing. Stop investing in these countries. So the same way that type of pressure is being put on Israel. Now, of course, it's going to take time, but it is built. You could not go on an American campus. If I spoke on an American campus 10 years ago on the question of Israel-Palestine, I'd be shouted out, you Nazi or whatever. Things have changed. And that is because of solidarity action. And this is happening with Kashmiris as well. And that's the positive side. Many young Kashmiris, young Kashmiri activists, academics, both within Kashmir, outside of Kashmir, it's amazing. If you can get their pieces written in the New York Times and stuff like that, there is a change. There's a change. But you have to capitalize on that. If you just allow it to stay on the pages of the New York Times, nothing's going to happen. So you have to capitalize on now the awareness that's been created of the barbarism, of the state terror of India in Kashmir. Recognize that, build international solidarity, and also recognize, and this is the last point I'll say, that my own hunch is, I'll just put it that, and it's actually stronger than a hunch, that of course, there's no way that, I don't think that India is going to respect any form of international law, or just forget about it. That, in my view, we can have a debate on that, but it is going to be liberated. Kashmir will be, it will be liberated. But it will be an armed struggle. It will take many components. There will be an armed struggle component to it. Now, the only point that I will make to that is that Kashmiris, Pakistanis should welcome anyone from anywhere in the world. Just like the Palestinians have done in the international solidarity movement. Rachel Corrie, who got crushed by an Israeli bulldozer standing there in solidarity with Palestinians. So this is what Kashmiris need to do. Kashmiris, Pakistanis, all of it, make it like that. You get people from all over who recognize exactly what's going on, that this is ongoing colonialism, a brutal military occupation that deserves solidarity from every single corner. I mean, why can't we invite a Desmond Tutu who says that what I've seen in Palestine is worse than what we experienced in apartheid South Africa? And you invite these people to say the same thing of what's going on in Kashmir. And allow all of these people to come there, raise their voice there, a prophetic voice, and others that want to be involved in resisting Indian occupation by any means necessary, as Malcolm X said. I think that's the point to be made. So thank you very much.
Thank you.